Man or ape? What are we? This is the question of the ages. The defense calls the attention of the court to Exhibit A, a replica of an ancient skull. 3 such pieces of evidence were set forth here in the famous Scopes trial. Amazing to tell, all of the supposed evidence for evolution has proved to be false.
Darrow used the trial not so much to promote academic freedom, but to belittle biblical fundamentalism as personified in William Jennings Bryan. Darrow's anti-religious sentiment was clear throughout the trial and was clearly seen a few years later when he returned to Dayton, saw a church being constructed, and quipped, "I guess I didn't do much good here after all." Popular histories of the Scopes trial have distorted the event, such as the film and play Inherit the Wind.
It may be a very arresting drama, but it's very inaccurate history. And in fact, the 2 authors of it, Lawrence and Lee, say in their preface that this is not the Scopes trial.
Distortions or not, overall, people remember the Scopes trial as promoting the idea that man came from the apes.
Darwin said that if evolution were true, the evidence would be found in the fossil record. But exactly what does the fossil record show? What do 130 years of discoveries actually demonstrate? Do they support the creation model or the evolution model? The defense calls to the witness stand geologist Dr. Steve Austin.
The fossils appear abruptly, fully formed in the fossil record, arguing for multiple abrupt appearances or creation more than they do for evolution.
The fossil record. What do the fossils show about origins?
Geologists have discovered something quite different and contrary to the...
Dr. Steve Austin, who heads the geology department of the Institute for Creation Research, San Diego, California, has studied the fossil record in depth.
All the major phyla that we have today of organisms, the basic categories of organisms, the basic broad patterns of types of creatures, all are found in the earliest strata of the Earth. We have multicellular organisms, all the phyla appear abruptly, fully formed, without transitional forms.
Since the mid-19th century, paleontologists have dug up fossils all around the world, looking to see what the fossils show about origins. Today, more than 100 million fossils are cataloged in museums around the globe. Of these 100 million fossils, not one is a transitional form, which would chronicle evolution in progress. For example, if evolution were true, we'd expect to find fossils of fish that began to become amphibians, or fossils of reptiles that began to become birds. Popularizers of evolution often tout this fossil, Archaeopteryx, a bird with reptilian features, as such a transitional form. Nonetheless, leading evolutionists admit that Archaeopteryx can't be a transitional form, since there are many fossils of modern birds that date much earlier than Archaeopteryx. Indeed, evolutionists themselves admit that the fossil record is void of the evidence of evolution. There are no transitional forms. Commenting on how evolutionists explain the lack of transitional forms in the fossil record is Dr. Scott Hughes, former atheist and evolutionist and author of The Collapse of Evolution.
The excuse used to be that, well, give us more time and we'll find the fossils, the missing links. Well, that no longer holds water. The fossil record is imaginably rich, and yet the links are still missing. And so they've resorted to something known as punctuated equilibrium, or the hopeful monster mechanism. Simply stated, that just means that a reptile laid an egg and a bird hopped out. In other words, a giant leap in evolution. They're saying, well, since we can't prove that evolution happens slowly through gradual processes, perhaps it happened suddenly, and we just jumped from fishes to amphibians and so forth.
Gradualism, I was taught when I went to school, evolution happens so slow you can't see it. Punctuated equilibrium is a new or resurgence of another idea today that's becoming popular that basically says it happened so fast in the past we missed it. So it happened so fast we missed it, or slow we can't see it. Perhaps the evidence really is saying that it didn't happen at all. In other words, evolution didn't happen.
Biologist Ken Ham from Australia, a science educator for the Institute for Creation Research, believes the creation-evolution debate ultimately boils down to the underlying assumptions.
Both creationists and evolutionists have exactly the same evidence. We have the same world, we have the same rock strata, we have the same fossil deposits, we all have the same evidence. So really the fight's not about evidence, the fight is about how you view the evidence, and how you view the evidence depends on where you start from.
Every scientist evaluates the data on the basis of his unproven assumptions.
One of the things that we have to really understand is the fact that no scientist is neutral. All scientists are biased. If you take someone who's an atheist, and there are many scientists today, there are many well-known people who claim to be atheists, and many well-known anti-creationists who are atheists. Isaac Asimov, I believe, professes to be an atheist publicly. He signed the Humanist Manifesto. If such a person is already committed to the religion of atheism, no matter what evidence he finds in the fossil record or the living animals and plants, he can never allow it to support the Bible, and never allow the Bible to have any possible explanation. Why? Because the Bible's wrong. He's already ruled that out. He's an atheist.
So the evolutionist has his bias, and the creationist has his bias. So the real question is, if one examined the scientific evidence with an open mind attempting to be as objective as possible, which view of origins explains the mystery better, evolution or creation?
The data, fossils and rock strata, do not prove anything. They have to be interpreted through a framework. And whatever framework we hold in biases or colors our interpretation, the geologic evidence has to be interpreted by a framework or a series of hypotheses which are largely held by faith.
That fact that at root the creation-evolution debate boils down to your beginning assumptions, your presuppositions, which are held by faith, is not made clear, usually, by the evolutionists. We're here now at the scene of the crime, if you will, the high school science classroom. Scopes was convicted for teaching evolution in the classroom. Today, many creationists are convicted for teaching creation in the science classroom. In classrooms like these around our country, students learn of the tremendous intricacies and complexities of the universe in which we live. And yet, they're told that all of this complexity came about merely by random chance. Let me give you a simple illustration of the absurdity of that view. A pocket watch. If we could see through its face, we would see the inner mechanisms of mainspring, gears, and all of the intricate workings which were designed and crafted to display the passing of minutes and hours. And now for a simple experiment in how not to care for a fine timepiece. Well, I see that all the parts are still here, but I must say they look somewhat different. Do you suppose that if we were to shake these parts together for a few million years, that they'd all reassemble themselves and tell us the time once more? Of course you don't believe that, and neither do I. And yet, this is basically what evolutionists are telling our children about the even more complex origin of life. Well, I see it's time for some more testimony.
Well, the probability of life originating through mere random processes, as evolutionists contend, really, honestly, is about zero.
The fossil record is interpreted through the scientists' underlying assumptions, be they creationist or evolutionary assumptions. What are the probabilities that evolution could have occurred?
Some authors have likened the probability of life originating through just by accident processes to a tornado passing through a junkyard and assembling something like a 747 or the space shuttle. I mean, it's utterly ludicrous. If you consider probability statistics, it exposes the naivete and the foolishness, really, of the evolutionary viewpoint.
Take one example, the DNA molecule, the building block of life. What are the probabilities that the DNA molecule could have just evolved? Biochemists have discovered that there are 10 to the 87 proven ways to put together the material in just one rung of human DNA. 10 to the 87th power is 10 with 87 zeros following. Probabilities show that it would take far more than 4.5 billion years, the age of the Earth according to evolutionists, for just that one rung of one DNA molecule to be created by chance. The incredibly complex design of DNA and of life itself points to a designer.
You hear very little about chance producing life in most scientific literature today for a simple reason, and that is that the complexity of living things have been explored with electron microscopes and many other means to show the utter complexity of even what we would call the simplest living thing. So most scientists would readily grant that however life happened, it did not happen by chance.
Dr. Thaxton should know what most scientists think today. He has scoured the scientific literature on origins for the past 15 years. Dr. Thaxton has a PhD in physical chemistry, as well as a postdoctorate degree in molecular biology and a postdoctorate in the history and philosophy of science from Harvard.
I'd say in my years of study, the amazing thing is the utter complexity of living things, and how to reconcile that with the different theories that have been put forward about just simple chemistry can, even over a long period of time, millions and millions of years, it's very difficult to account for how that happened.
Not only is it difficult to account for the simple cell, but also the human body, indeed the whole universe. As modern skyscrapers have been carefully designed and are evidence of intelligent creation, so the universe has been carefully designed and is evidence of intelligent creation. The idea that life just evolved from time plus chance plus nothing is comparable to an explosion at a scrapyard producing a rocket ship. Our search for origins takes us from outer space to the depths of the Earth. Since 1859, when Darwin's The Origin of Species shook the world, there's been an ongoing search for the missing link, a transitional form from ancient ape to modern man, as depicted here with great artistic license. As we examine the human fossil record, have scientists ever found a missing link?
Well, this morning then, it's my pleasure to talk with you a bit about life is more than chemistry.
Commenting on human evolution and the missing links is Dr. Gary Parker, a former evolutionist who used to teach evolution as a college professor.
Today it's actually difficult to give a picture of what evolutionists believe about human evolution, because so much of the ideas about evolution have been undone by evolutionists themselves.
Unfortunately, a lot of the so-called missing links have been built from extremely fragmentary evidence, just a little teeny bit of bone and an awful lot of imagination. As a taxpayer, your money is going to, in the textbooks and so on, presenting information in the schools that's just completely false, that even the evolutionists would be embarrassed to see are being presented there. Recent issue of a famous magazine, National Geographic. Nice illustrations, very nicely done and so on, but in telling the evolutionary story, even if I were still teaching evolution, I would be unable to use that information because it wasn't even true according to the evolution model.
Many of the finds that were once classified as missing links have now been rejected and reclassified as either ancient ape or ancient man. For example, 1856, Neanderthal man, reclassified in the 1960s as true men suffering from arthritis and other ailments. 1912, Piltdown man, exposed as a hoax in 1953. 1922, Hesperopithecus, rejected 5 years later when found to be an extinct pig. 1959, Zinjanthropus, displaced shortly thereafter by a later find. 1964, Ramapithecus, reclassified in 1979 as an orangutan. And the list goes on.
As I say to people, you've often heard of the evolutionists talking about the missing link. What do they find? Nothing. What do they label it as? Missing. But the point is it really missing in the evidence? Or is it that they've got the wrong starting point, which is why they're interpreting the evidence wrongly?
So far, you've seen abundant evidence undermining the theory of evolution and thus establishing the only alternative, creation. Evidence that's never been presented in the classrooms of this country's public schools. In fact, it's evidence that most Americans have never heard. That's why television programs like this one are so vital. We must expose our nation, and most importantly, our nation's youth, to the truth about creation and evolution, as well as other important and pressing issues of our time. As we've already seen from our first group of expert scientific witnesses today, the fossil record and other modern scientific data favor the creation model. But what are our children being taught in public schools today? To answer that question, I would like to present Exhibit B, which is a popular textbook used in our public schools on biological science, produced, by the way, at taxpayer expense in part. In the chapter on human evolution, 4 different skulls are presented to the children, which ostensibly show the gradual evolution of man from the primitive to the modern. But a close examination of these skulls reveals that they are simply 2 skulls of apes and 2 of humans with no transitions at all. What has happened to our public schools? The defense calls Dr. Walter Bradley.
I think there is no question in my mind but what the representation of origins in textbooks is very biased. I think it tends to, as I've indicated, significantly exaggerate the significance of the information, the factual information that's available on the subject, and to try to interpret that information to imply much more than it really does.
The public school. 40 million children from the ages of 5 to 18 attend these institutions. From kindergarten's ABCs to grade school grammar to the college prep courses in high school, children spend 50% of their days learning. But is the information they receive accurate and reliable? Or are they being taught, as Dr. Bradley mentioned, material that is biased, exaggerated, or misinterpreted?
The origin of man basically evolves around evolution theory. Scientific fact has proven that all life has evolved from a single cell. And basically man has evolved from the primate. And then finally,
I would certainly feel that the textbooks today tend to lean very heavily toward a very humanistic view of man and origins, far in excess of what the data would suggest.
Dr. Walter Bradley, professor of genetics at Texas A&M, has researched the evolutionary content in high school textbooks. He has found in many cases that the books are not reflective of the true scientific data.
The people who do the scientific work are not the same people who write the textbooks. And as a result, there's oftentimes a real lag, time-wise, between the development of new scientific understanding and its finding its way into textbooks.
For instance, Dr. Bradley and others have found a number of examples in which disproven information has actually been printed in textbooks. In Biology Today and Tomorrow, printed in 1980 by West Publishing, Ramapithecus, a supposed missing link, is touted as a known ancestor of man. Yet in 1979, the scientific community disavowed Ramapithecus when it was found that it was actually an extinct orangutan. Today, high school students are still being taught this material as fact. For many years, it was believed that the Earth's early atmosphere was full of energy-rich gases which could cause reactions to produce living systems. In the last 10 years, it has become widely known that those gases were not present in great amounts, making it impossible to supposedly produce life. Dr. Bradley reviewed 14 textbooks on this material.
We found that of the 14 textbooks that were being submitted, only one acknowledged that this early assumption was no longer consistent with current scientific understanding. And let me emphasize, this is at least 7 or 8 years after people have come to recognize that that never was really the case.
There's definitely a double standard that's being practiced in evolutionary circles. The flaws in evolutionary theory have been kept pretty much as an in-house argument for decades.
Dr. Scott Morrow, professor of biochemistry, considers himself an agnostic and an evolutionist. However, Dr. Morrow finds it difficult to stand by his fellow evolutionists when he sees the obvious bias and prejudice that has been promulgated in today's textbooks.
There's an injustice being done to science when the theory of evolution is being presented as a mass of obviously true facts. And also I sense an injustice where science is concerned when there is no accommodation given to equivalently useful explanatory theories or hypotheses.
And what does the public think school children should be taught concerning evolution and these other equivalent theories? A recent AP-NBC news poll posed the question concerning theories of origins. What do you think should be taught in public schools?
I think creation should be taught in the public schools.
The study indicated only 10% of Americans polled wanted creation taught exclusively.
I only want evolution taught to my children.
8% wanted only evolution taught in public schools.
I'd say probably both approaches would be fair.
Overwhelmingly, 76% of those polled favored the teaching of both evolution and creation side by side. Yet, despite what the public says, evolution is still taught as fact. Consider some of the all too common statements high school students read each day in their textbooks.
Life began more than 3 billion years ago and has been passed on from organism to organism, generation to generation, to the present.
The human brain is, of course, the product of millions of years of evolution. The human brain to the primitive vertebrate brain.
Like other organisms, we too are the products of random process, and that as far as science can show, we are not created for any special purpose or as a part of any universal design.
These statements are actual quotes from science textbooks used in our tax-sponsored schools. Evolution is taught as fact, and evidences for creation are excluded. Why? According to Dr. Morrow, evolutionists fear what could happen if both theories were taught.
And now I think their fears are well-founded. I think if they did allow into, let's say, the public school system, a full entrance of all the information and all the criticisms that origins science involves, I think pretty clearly the evolutionists would lose, hands down.
Dear God, if you made the sun and the moon and the stars, you must have had lots of equipment. Love, Jonathan. Dear God, my daddy said we all came from monkeys. Is that really true? Love, David.
Dear God, I didn't think orange went very good with purple until I saw the sunset you made. That was cool. Dear God, are you real? Some people don't believe it. If you are, you better do something quick.
During that trial, John T. Scopes sat right here as he listened to evidence being presented on both sides of the issue. As a teacher, he symbolized the quest for academic freedom. Today, there are many other teachers who also desire academic freedom. Teachers whose views are being suppressed simply because they believe in creation. The defense presents Exhibit C, personnel file for one of the many creationists who have been fired, who have lost their positions or been discriminated against because of their view of origins. Today, you'll meet just 3 of them. The defense calls Professor Jerry Bergman.
To me, the evidence clearly points to creationism. You can see evidence of design everywhere in the living world. You can see things that simply defy evolution. When you really examine carefully evolution, removing the preconceived ideas, I think you can see clearly, from what research that I've done, it's clearly that evolution did not occur, and it's clear that we could not have gotten here by evolution. This is the older ideas going back.
It is for holding this very viewpoint that Dr. Jerry Bergman lost his job. With 7 earned degrees, a PhD, and 21 years of successful teaching, Dr. Bergman was denied his tenure at the Bowling Green State University.
My colleagues at Bowling Green made it very clear that their objections to me were my beliefs, especially in creationism. They stressed over and over that one who believed that God created us is like one who believes in the flat earth theory. That there's something wrong if you believe that God created us, that evolution is proved, it's fact. We did not get here by creationism. We got here by natural selection, by the process of evolution. Therefore, if you accept creationism, there's something wrong with you.
But it's just so unfair to see this happen to a fine young man whose credentials were impeccable, whose education was impeccable, and whose leadership at the university at that time was just unquestioned until he began to challenge the evolutionary hypothesis, and that cost him his job.
Bill Keith, former state senator of Louisiana and the president of the Academic Legal Defense Fund, an organization committed to aiding individuals who were denied these freedoms of speech, attempted to help Dr. Bergman on the legal level, but to no avail.
The Legal Defense Fund intervened on his behalf as a friend of the court, and our attorney Wendell Bird and others filed a brief on his behalf. But by the time the Legal Defense Fund got there, it was really just about too far gone to do much for him.
They can do that legally. They can deny tenure for any reason they want to, except, theoretically, your religion, your race, your nationality, or your sex. But they do all the time. In fact, studies have shown that tenure is often denied on the basis of illegal grounds. But they can cover that fairly easily. They can say, well, it wasn't Dr. Jones's race. We didn't object to that. It was something else.
Dr. Bergman found that he was not the first person that had been denied tenure under the guise of something else. After intensive research, Dr. Bergman published a book citing case after case of creationists who lost their degrees, their jobs, and had their tenure denied, all because of their beliefs.
I have yet, and I've spoken about this at probably a dozen conventions, I have yet to find a single out-of-the-closet creationist who has earned tenure in any state university in America, ever. Not one single one.
Unlike Dr. Bergman, Robert Farwell is not a university professor and has not lost his job. But Mr. Farwell does share the same haunting sense that he is being discriminated against for his beliefs as a creationist.
About 3 years ago, I started teaching a pilot program in earth science at the high school level. As I did so, I implemented a two-model approach to any topics that dealt with the origin situation in science.
When the school administration at Raytown High School in Raytown, Missouri, discovered what Mr. Farwell was teaching, both evolution and creation, the director of curriculum sent a memo to him stating that any instructional materials you use in the classroom must be consistent with textbook materials purchased by the school district.
Well, of course, the viewpoint of the textbook is solely evolutionary. There is no balanced treatment whatsoever, and that's where I've decided that I cannot do that I would continue to teach what I thought was a fair treatment of the origins issue.
Now, he has been told by his principal and some other authorities there that if he doesn't stop telling about these alternate ideas of origins, that he'll be out of a job, that they'll have to let him go.
But according to a recent Supreme Court decision, Mr. Farwell's job should not be in jeopardy. Although the Supreme Court struck down the Louisiana Balanced Treatment Act requiring teachers to teach both theories of origins side by side, the court also clearly stated that teaching a variety of scientific theories about the origins of humankind to school children might be validly done with the clear secular intent of enhancing the effectiveness of science instruction. But the principal and school board have appeared not to recognize this fact and have also accused him of teaching a two-model approach because of religious motivation.
My goal in teaching science is not to cram religion or Christianity or biblical concepts down the throats of my kids. All I want them to do is to open up their minds to other possibilities.
When I've heard him speak on both of the issues, he's very convincing for both sides. He does not favor, I mean, if you ask him whether he's a creationist or an evolutionist, he will state that he's a creationist. But I really feel that he proposes both sides of the story equally.
As long as Bob Farwell continues to propose both sides, he, like Jerry Bergman, could lose his job. But all Bob asks for is a simple thing called academic freedom.
What I want out of this whole thing is my freedom to be able to teach science the way I think science ought to be taught. And I don't want to press my views and force other teachers into doing what I'm doing. But I want to be free, and I want my students to be free to be taught this fair and balanced treatment of origin questions.
The events of the last several years of my life have really brought out some interesting facts with regard to how the scientific community is going to react when evidence for creation is presented to them.
The last several years have been eye-opening for Dr. Robert Gentry. For 13 years, Gentry held a government-funded guest position at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. According to his colleagues, his credentials in his area of research were outstanding.
Bob Gentry is one who's been respected. He's respected worldwide. I think he's considered a world authority on this. He's known in Russia, Europe, and all over the United States for the work he's done in pleochroic halos.
I have not known anybody that downgraded Bob's work. They thought his work was exceptional. In the area of pleochroic halos, Bob is the #1 scientist in the world, really.
Gentry published many of these findings which supported creationism in the open scientific community. As a result, Dr. Gentry was asked to testify at the Arkansas creation trial in December of 1981, a trial testing an Arkansas law which mandated the teaching of creation science alongside evolution in the public schools.
I went to the trial, presented the evidence that I had published. In fact, evolutionists there were asked to comment upon the evidence that I had been publishing in the open scientific literature. They didn't have any response. They didn't have any answer at all for the evidence for creation. It stood unrefuted at the end of the trial.
After the trial was over, Gentry's testimony was presented in the scientific media. But a writer from the magazine Science, a highly reputable scientific journal, misquoted and misrepresented Robert's work. But this was just the beginning of Bob's problems. That same year, Oak Ridge National Laboratory did not renew his contract.
There seemed to be, after he testified in some of the open trials on creationism, there seemed to be a change in attitude towards him. And it wasn't too long after that that his contract was terminated.
See, the Department of Energy reads Science magazine, and if something good is said about you as a scientist in Science magazine, the Department of Energy is very happy. Money comes to the organization. If something negative is said, then the questions are raised, and the funding, you know, is actually called into question. They can't stand criticism. And at the time I became a personality in the media because of my testimony there at the Arkansas trial, although I also became a potential liability because of the criticism that were appearing in the press.
Gentry is continuing his research, but no longer at the multi-million-dollar facilities of the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Instead, Robert Gentry, a scientist known internationally for his outstanding contributions, now does his research out of a basement laboratory.
There's no doubt in my mind that where I am today and doing my research here in the basement of my home is a direct result of my espousing the evidence for creation, not only in the open scientific literature, but in bringing it out to the public at the Arkansas trial and making it clear to my scientific colleagues that I'm challenging the very basic fundamental premise on which they're working on. Yes, I'm here today because I'm a creation scientist and not an evolutionist. If I were an evolutionist, I'd still be out at that laboratory, I do believe.
Robert Gentry, Robert Farwell, and Jerry Bergman, three men who seek only fairness and balance, yet have been unquestionably censored from the public forum.
As William Jennings Bryan took the witness stand in the Scopes trial, I would like to take the witness stand today to testify in this trial. Why is it, when so much scientific evidence today favors creationism, a very small part of which you have seen on this program, that a number of judges have struck down scientific creation in recent court cases? I believe the answer is to be found in the fact that judges also have their own prejudices. And the very word creationism causes them to believe that this is merely religious dogma. In fact, they seem to be unable to distinguish between scientific fact and religious dogma. The fact of the matter is we're simply talking about abrupt appearances. And when you examine the fossil record, you discover that everything has appeared abruptly and fully formed without any transitional forms at all. However, in the courtroom, scientific evidence is subject to judicial power. The defense, therefore, would like to introduce Exhibit D, a symbol of the judicial prejudice which in our time continues to hammer away at the truth of creationism.
For the most part, judges and courts have ruled against creation science being allowed in the public schools. This rejection climaxed when the Supreme Court on June 19, 1987, struck down the Louisiana law that mandated balanced treatment, the teaching of both models of origins. The court majority stated that the law endorses religion by advancing the religious belief that a supernatural being created humankind. In his brilliant dissent, Justice Antonin Scalia wrote, "In this case, however, it seems to me that the court's position is the repressive one. The people of Louisiana, including those who are Christian fundamentalists, are quite entitled as a secular matter to have whatever scientific evidence there may be against evolution presented in their schools, just as Mr. Scopes was entitled to present whatever scientific evidence there was for it." Justice Scalia is correct. What the creationists want, by and large, is not that their view alone be taught, but both sides. Evolutionist and agnostic Scott Morrow highlights the danger of continuing to allow only one view of origins, evolution, to be taught in our schools.
Exposure to the theory of evolution ultimately will make people atheists. I believe they will not just be atheists, but they will be rabidly anti-Christian and anti-ethical by any rational standard.
Even back in the 1920s, William Jennings Bryan argued, since religious dogma is not allowed to be taught in the public schools, then surely anti-religious dogma should not be allowed to be taught in the public schools.
Public schools are public schools. They're there for the general public with a diversity of views. An odd phenomenon that's happening today is that everybody likes pluralism, but they don't like any pluralism for the religious side of the spectrum or the conservative side of the political spectrum. That's not right. Fairness means teaching all views on any subject rather than indoctrinating in a few selected views that happen to be preferred by liberal public school administrators. In the subject of origins, fairness means teaching all of the scientific evidence, not just some.
A major obstacle in the fight for fairness in the schools is the media. Gary Parker observes that much of the creationist time is consumed with correcting wrong information dispensed by the media.
And especially with the newspapers and magazines and so on, continuing to perpetuate wildly out-of-date information. Just educating the public even on what evolutionists believe and why these various fossils have been discredited is really an important part of what we do.
Another important task for the creationists, believe it or not, is educating the churches on this issue.
But I've found Christians to be absolutely woefully ignorant of basic Christian doctrine because they don't understand the foundations in Genesis. They think that evolution has been proven to be true, therefore they think that you don't trust Genesis, and because they don't have a foundation in their own life, they don't put it in their children's lives, and they wonder why so many children rebel against Christianity. They don't have the foundations.
To give Christians those foundations, Ken Ham speaks in churches around the world.
And I believe there's an awesome responsibility on our part, because if we don't give them the right foundation, the structure's not going to stand that should stand. There is a battle between Christianity and humanism, but at a foundational level it's creation versus evolution. And what's going to happen to the nation of America and Australia and England and other nations is going to be reflected by what happens in regard to the battle between creation and evolution. It's not just a scientific side issue, it is a foundational issue to the whole of what life is all about.
Ken Ham is right. The battle between creation and evolution is not a side issue. In fact, it's the major reason so many of our young people consider abortion and euthanasia viable solutions to social problems. They've been taught in public school that life is just a mere accident, a random occurrence in a chaotic and meaningless universe. That's why you and I must step in and expose the lies of evolution and present the convincing truth about God's marvelous creation. We've seen that in our textbooks, all of the scientific information supporting creation has been removed. In fact, whatever information is presented, it's always presented in a way to support evolution, even information and evidence which doesn't, in actuality, support evolution. Fourthly, there is a matter of discrimination. Instructors, professors, and researchers are being fired from their jobs, removed from positions, and their views are being censored simply because of their belief in creation. My friends, this has to stop. You have been the jury. You've heard the case for creation. You must decide. Remember, Clarence Darrow was right. It is the height of bigotry to teach only one view of origins. That bigotry needs to end. The trial of history has not been kind to evolution. In fact, the whole theory is in chaos today. It is increasingly being discovered that evolution is not based upon scientific fact, but rather upon experiments that will not come off, on missing links that will not be found, on fossils that are fraudulent, and on probabilities that are zero. In 1925, in this courtroom, John Scopes lost his case. But through the media, the evolutionists won the war. Recently, we creationists lost an important case. But through such media as this, I believe that the war can yet be won. Truth will prevail. The defense rests. Goodbye, and God bless you.